When historians study the fall of civilizations, they rely on patterns. Empires do not simply vanish. They leave behind scars, burn layers in archaeological strata, collapsed walls, mass graves, weapons embedded in stone, written accounts of war, famine, rebellion, or invasion. From Mesopotamia to Rome, from the Aztecs to the Khmer Empire, collapse is almost always violent, visible, and traceable. Even when a civilization declines slowly, the process leaves unmistakable signs. Shrinking urban centers, degraded infrastructure, gradual loss of administrative complexity. History, in other words, is usually loud. This is what makes Tartaria such an anomaly. If Tartaria were merely a myth or a cartographic error, it would not require explanation. But historical maps, travel accounts, and administrative records from the 16th to 18th centuries consistently refer to Tartaria as a vast, organized region, not an empty wilderness. And yet, when Tartaria disappears from historical narratives, we do not see widespread destruction layers, records of catastrophic wars, clear documentation of conquest. Instead, we see something far more unusual. The structures remain, but the civilization disappears from memory. This is not a normal historical outcome. Let us compare Tartaria with three well-documented collapses. Rome. Rome's fall left. Burnt urban layers. Broken aqueducts. Fortifications showing siege damage. Extensive written records of decline and invasion. Maya civilization. Maya cities show sudden abandonment. Ecological stress markers. Evidence of warfare between city-states. Angkor. Angkor's decline includes hydraulic system failure, encroaching jungle, clear archaeological transition phases. In all three cases, cause and consequence are visible. Now ask the same questions of Tartaria. Where are the ruins of its final battles? Where are the chronicles describing its defeat? Where are the layers of destruction? The answers are disturbingly unclear. Across regions once labeled as Tartaria, we observe a repeating pattern. Cities with sophisticated stone architecture. Infrastructure inconsistent with nomadic societies. Fortifications that appear older than their official builders. Yet instead of being destroyed, these cities are reoccupied, renamed, absorbed into new political entities. This suggests inheritance, not conquest. In historical terms, this is rare. Empires that conquer usually announce it loudly. They celebrate victories. They document triumphs. But Tartaria's disappearance seems to lack victors. Historians often treat silence as absence. But silence itself can be evidence. When a large political or cultural entity disappears without accounts of war, treaties of surrender, narratives of rebellion, we must consider alternative explanations. One possibility is gradual internal collapse. But even gradual collapse leaves fragmented successor states, cultural continuity under new names, clear transitional periods. Instead, Tartaria appears to be administratively erased, not evolutionarily transformed. One of the most powerful tools in historical transformation is renaming. Cities renamed, peoples reclassified, regions redefined. When this happens, the physical world stays the same. The narrative changes. In the case of Tartaria, the land remains. The architecture remains. The roads, canals, and fortifications remain. What changes is the story attached to them. This suggests not annihilation, but reframing. It is far easier to destroy a civilization than to erase it. Destruction requires force. Erasure requires coordination. To erase a civilization, one must control education, standardize maps, rewrite administrative records, redefine language. This process is slow, subtle, and often invisible to those living through it, which raises an uncomfortable question. If Tartaria did not fall through destruction, who benefited from its disappearance? The psychological bias of modern history. Modern historical thinking carries a bias. If it were important, we would know about it. But this assumes historical records are neutral, education systems are complete, maps are objective. None of these assumptions are fully true. History is not merely what happened. It is what was preserved, transmitted, and taught. Tartaria challenges this assumption directly. A destroyed civilization teaches a lesson. An erased civilization teaches obedience. Because when memory is controlled, questioning becomes difficult. If Tartaria vanished without fire or war, then its disappearance was not an accident. It was a process. And processes leave traces, not in ruins, but in inconsistencies. This first part does not claim that Tartaria was perfect, that it ruled the world, that giants unquestionably dominated history. It establishes something far more important. The way Tartaria disappeared does not match known historical patterns. And when patterns break, historians must ask why. If Tartaria vanished without destruction, the next logical question is, when did the world stop acknowledging it? To answer that, we must examine the maps. Not what they show, but what they suddenly stop showing. Written history can lie openly. Maps rarely do, at least not casually. Creating a map requires political authority, administrative consensus, economic justification. Maps are not personal opinions. They are institutional statements. That is why, when a name disappears from maps across multiple countries in a short period of time, historians must pay attention. Tartaria did not fade from memory first. It faded from maps first. And that distinction matters. From the late 1500s through the mid-1700s, Tartaria appears consistently on European maps. Not as a rumor, not as an empty label, but as a defined geopolitical region. Cartographers such as Gerardus Mercator, Abraham Ortelius, Guillaume de Lisle, all include Tartaria with clear borders, internal divisions, regional identifiers. Some maps even differentiate between Great Tartary, Independent Tartary, Chinese Tartary, Muscovite Tartary. This level of detail indicates administrative knowledge, not speculation. Many defenders of conventional history argue that Tartaria was simply a vague term for unexplored eastern territories. This argument fails under scrutiny. Why? Because maps already had labels for terra incognita, unexplored regions, mythological lands. Tartaria was not placed in those categories. It was named, subdivided, and contextualized. Cartographers do not subdivide ignorance. Between roughly 1760 and 1820, something changes. New editions of maps reduce Tartaria's size, fragment it into smaller regions, or remove the name entirely. What replaces it? Russia, China, Central Asian Khanates, newly defined imperial borders. But here is the key issue. This transformation happens too fast. Political geography usually lags behind reality. Maps are conservative by nature. Yet Tartaria vanishes within a few decades. That speed demands explanation. Let us compare Tartaria's cartographic disappearance with known political changes. Example: the Ottoman Empire. Even after territorial loss, maps continued to label Ottoman regions for decades. Example: the Holy Roman Empire. Despite fragmentation, the name persisted long after its effective power declined. Example: the Mongol Empire. Even after collapse, maps reflected transitional phases, not instant erasure. In all cases, names fade gradually. Transitional labels appear. Overlapping identities coexist. Tartaria shows none of this. Its name is simply removed. Maps are not neutral tools. They serve taxation, military logistics, trade routes, diplomatic recognition. To remove a name from maps is to declare, this entity no longer exists in any meaningful way. Such a declaration requires authority, which raises the question, who had the power, motivation, and reach to standardize this change across Europe and beyond? The late 18th and early 19th centuries saw centralized empires, standardized education, global navigation networks, printing press expansion. This was the first era in which maps could be synchronized, narratives could be aligned, inconsistencies could be eliminated. If Tartaria's removal was intentional, this period provided the tools. One of the most striking features of Tartaria's disappearance is not what is said. It is what is not said. There is no Fall of Tartaria chapter, widely accepted conquest narrative, clear diplomatic record dissolving it. Instead, history books quietly move on. When a major geopolitical entity disappears without explanation, historians usually flag it as a problem. In this case, the silence is normalized. Rather than describing a transition, maps simply reassign territories, compress timelines, present the new order as ancient. This creates the illusion that it was always this way. But maps from just decades earlier contradict that illusion. This is not evolution. It is revision. This part does not claim Tartaria ruled the world. Cartographers conspired globally. Maps were falsified maliciously. It establishes something more cautious, yet more troubling. The removal of Tartaria from maps was abrupt, coordinated, and unexplained by normal historical processes. And when documentation changes faster than physical reality, historians must ask why. If Tartaria disappeared from maps first, the next question becomes unavoidable. What happened on the ground? Did people vanish? Did cities empty? Or did new populations simply move into spaces that already existed? That question leads us to population records, settlement patterns, and inherited cities. In conventional history, urban development follows a predictable sequence. A population settles. Temporary structures appear. Infrastructure develops gradually. Stone architecture emerges last. This pattern is consistent across cultures and time periods. Wood precedes stone. Villages precede cities. Function precedes monumentality. When this order is reversed, historians must pause. Because reversed order implies inheritance, not creation. Across regions once labeled as Tartaria, historical records describe a recurring phenomenon. Settlers arriving to find stone cities already standing. Fortifications existing before military occupation. Roads and canals in place before administrative control. This is not an isolated claim. It appears in early Russian expansion records, Central Asian travel accounts, Siberian settlement descriptions. Yet these observations are rarely framed as a problem. They are simply glossed over. Large-scale stone construction requires a stable workforce, long-term planning, logistical infrastructure, cultural continuity. These elements cannot appear overnight. However, in many former Tartarian regions, cities are officially dated to periods when populations were sparse. Architecture is attributed to groups without prior stone-building tradition. Construction timelines are compressed unrealistically. Historians often solve this by saying, "They learned quickly." But history shows learning curves do not work that way. Let us compare two models: founded cities, gradual growth, mixed materials, architectural experimentation, clear developmental stages, inherited cities.